Okay, so once again, my name is Tanya. My pronouns are she, ella. I am the grant programs manager at the fund, and today we are here to talk about the fall general cycle and a little bit about the fall multi-year cycle as well. On the agenda, we have a little bit of the history of the fund. We'll talk about the folks who make the decisions. We'll talk about the strategies that we use to carry out our mission. We'll talk about the capacity building program, which is another resource to you all as applicants, as well as the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative. We'll go over the funding guidelines and priorities, the funding cycles, the programs, and finally, we'll dive into the general cycle application that you all will be working on. And we'll also review the timeline, and we'll have time for question and answers at the end. But again, feel free to come off mute at any point with any questions that you have. This is the team. You've already met me. We also have two others with us today to support, and I'm going to let them go ahead and quickly introduce themselves. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you. My name is Kathleen Knight, pronouns she, ella, and I'm the capacity building manager with the Fund for Santa Barbara. And I'll pass it to Brian.
Thank you, Kathleen. My name is Brian Arizmendi Villanueva. My pronouns are he, him, el, and I am the program associate at the Fund for Santa Barbara. I'll pass it back to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Kathleen. Both of them you can see on the screen. We are a countywide organization. We have a North County and a South County office. The only thing to note is that Patricia Solorio, our Associate Director, and Crystal, our new Youth Making Change Coordinator, are based out of our North County office, while the majority of the rest of us are based out of the South County office. All of our emails are available on our website if you ever need to reach out to one of us specifically. And then, as I mentioned, we are countywide. These are our offices. We have one in Santa Barbara and one in Santa Maria. Our office hours are up to date for the most part, but I still want to encourage folks who want to visit us to give us a call ahead of time to make sure someone will be there to greet you. As you can see, the Santa Maria office in particular has limited office hours. With that, I'll hand it off to Kathleen to talk about the history.
Thanks, Tanya. The Fund for Santa Barbara was founded in 1980. Through our mission, the fund advances progressive change by strengthening movements for economic, environmental, political, racial, and social justice. We were founded in the post-civil rights era, and our founders were all supporters and activists of different social justice movements, like the Chicano rights movement, the feminist movement, the LGBTQ+ movement, the environmental movement, and so on. Through their activism, they kept seeing a pattern of foundations not supporting their activist-led progressive work, their politically engaged work, or work that was considered more controversial. They were also aware of the systems of oppression that exist in the world of philanthropy, and were looking for a foundation that was community-driven and would support their work. So they did their homework, didn't find what they were looking for, and then decided to create it. They created an alternative model for a community foundation, and the fund was born. Here are some unique features of the Fund for Santa Barbara. So the first thing to note is that we're a fundraising nonprofit. And unlike most foundations that have a large endowment or underwriter, we fundraise our budget annually and give it out to the community. We do have a small endowment, but we're not just an invested pool of money. We are very proud of the support that comes from our individual donors. We ask a lot of questions when taking private dollars, and we expect donors to walk their talk so there aren't any strings attached to the dollars we receive and give out. This keeps us in touch with the reality on the ground of what it's like to fundraise. To us, fundraising is organizing. This is why we doubled our grant making during the 2008 recession and tripled our emerging needs grant budget in 2020 during the height of the pandemic. The second thing to note is that we are unabashedly progressive. We don't pretend to be neutral. Our motto is change, not charity. It's not that we have something against charity. We think charity is absolutely critical. But we believe that social conditions improve most when those who have been denied power and justice lead on their own behalf to confront, challenge, and change the conditions that have denied them access to justice and equity. If you have a social service model project, then this probably isn't the place for you. Our mission is looking to support social change projects that address the root causes of social inequalities and the underlying conditions and circumstances that bring them about. The last thing is our activist-led decision-making model. We took the traditional foundation model and did everything we could to make it responsive and directed by grassroots activists. In our model, donors defer funding decisions to activists. Therefore, the thing to know about the fund is that the grant-making committee are the folks in charge of making our funding decisions, and that they are your audience when you're writing a grant proposal to the fund. Tanya will share more about our awesome grant-making committee.
Thanks, Kathleen. So that's correct. The fund uses an activist-led participatory decision-making model that fully empowers the grant-making committee, or GMC, to make the most effective use out of the resources that we're able to fundraise annually. And this means that fund staff, like myself and Kathleen, or the board, don't have the authority to make grants. This allows us to be able to provide technical support to applicants, and you can hopefully think of staff as an ally. The grant-making committee themselves is an inspiring group of volunteers with deep roots in our communities. They represent the entire region from North County all the way down to South County and everything in between. And they are community activists who are on the ground doing the work and understand the of, by, and for approach to supporting historically marginalized community members. And finally, again, they are your audience. And the reason why we share all this is because we believe that knowing your audience is an important part of writing a successful proposal. So if you would like to learn more about them and the work that they do in the community, I encourage you to visit our website and read their bios. And Brian is going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat for that. And then I'm going to hand it back to Kathleen to talk about the strategies we use at the fund.
Thanks, Tanya. So at the Fund for Santa Barbara, we meet our mission by employing 5 different strategies. The first, which is grant making and what we're best known for, is probably why you're here today. There are other ways that we support groups aside from funding. We build capacity of progressive organizations to help them be bold and effective. We host educational workshops, offer direct consulting, collect and share resources, and maintain a progressive community calendar of relevant events. We nurture coalitions by being a hub for convening collaborative efforts and serving as a trusted table to convene people and groups for strategy, resource sharing, and inspiration. This includes the Central Coast Immigrant Rights Coalition and the Economic Justice Working Group. We also influence philanthropy by advocating for more progressive approaches to philanthropy to support community organizing and movement building. We influence other foundations to support the work we do to create more funding opportunities for prospective applicants, such as unrestricted funding and access to resources for grassroots-led work. We also emphasize leadership development so that social justice movements and the progressive philanthropy sector look like the communities we serve, diverse, intergenerational, and values-driven. Now, I want to take a minute to tell you more about our capacity building program. We have a variety of program workshop offerings and offer community training throughout the year. Currently, we're hosting Central Coast Community Organizer Training, which is happening this fall in October in Santa Maria, where participants will learn and practice organizing fundamentals, connect with other activists, and develop strong campaign skills. Registration opens the week of August 15th, so keep an eye out on our social media, newsletter, and website for more information. Additionally, this program will be completely bilingual, so we welcome language speakers of all languages. We also have a variety of resources and recording on the fund's website. We also partner with the Nonprofit Resource Network for sector-wide resources, and you can check out their website to see more. We offer free one-on-one consulting services, so reach out to me and you can schedule direct time. We host online informal lunchtime activist meetings, which are a free-flowing space for activists to share work, seek resources and support, and engage with advocacy work. We meet the last Thursday of the month from 12 to 1:30 p.m. on Zoom, and you can email me to join this group. We're also working collectively to advance equity in the Central Coast through the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative. This is an effort informed by community-led research to understand intersectional inequity in the Central Coast. The findings are presented in the full study, but we also have specific issue area mini reports, digestible infographics, which are all community tools available on our website. We encourage you to utilize the report in the and the data for your advantage to leverage funding, resources, connections in your own work and network, as well as to help fulfill your mission. We'll be hosting some exciting training opportunities through the capacity building program for community this fall, so stay tuned. We also encourage you to include this information and data in your grant request to the Fund for Santa Barbara. You can feel free to schedule one-on-one time with me. We'll go through your grant request and I'll help you pull information from the report that can help strengthen your proposal to the Fund for Santa Barbara. We're now going to shift gears and dive into our funding program, so I'll pass it back over to Tanya.
Thanks, Kathleen. Just want to elevate that Kathleen is a great resource for anyone that is wanting to write a grant in general, but also a grant directed at the fund. And I do encourage folks to reach out to her for one-on-one consulting. Shifting gears, diving into the program, the funding programs that we have available. Let's start with the single year general grant program, which is the reason why most of you are here. It's offered in the spring and in the fall. The maximum request is $10,000 and the length of funding is 12 months. The multi-year grants are offered exclusively in the fall with the maximum request of $10,000 per year for 3 years for a maximum, a total funding amount of $30,000. Emerging needs grants are offered year-round until funds are expended, up to $5,000 for unforeseen circumstances, and the length of funding is 3 months. And the Youth Making Change cycles, we have two, one in North County, one in South County. They give up to $15,000. The maximum award for that program is $3,000, and it's specific for youth-led projects. And the length of funding for that is 6 months. I strongly encourage you to keep this grant opportunity in mind if your organization has a youth component with youth-led initiatives. And just to make a quick note of that, the RFP for that will be opening at the end of this month. I'll talk about our listserv in a moment, but if you would like to get more information about that, I encourage you to sign up to receive our emails. We also have two new field of interest funding programs. One of them is the Racial Equity Fund of the County of Santa Barbara, which is offered in collaboration with the county and is typically available in the wintertime. The maximum request is up to $100,000 for up to 3 years. And this funding program is specifically available to organizations or groups that are addressing anti-racism through systems change strategies. The only note is that organizations have to already be doing this work. New initiatives will not be considered at this time. The other new program that we have is the Mickey Flack Social Housing Fund, which is for organizations or groups advocating for and actively leading social housing justice campaigns in Santa Barbara County. There are 4 different funding categories that groups can apply under, and this program is open year-round, similar to the Emerging Needs Grant until funds are exhausted. Groups that are interested are subject to an initial screening by fund staff, and the maximum request is $5,000 for up to 12 months. Information about all of our program offerings is shared via our email list, like I mentioned, and I encourage you to sign up so that you don't miss any future funding opportunities. Brian is dropping the link to that in the chat. And in order to be eligible for any of our funding programs, all applicants must meet our funding guidelines and priorities, which have a recurring theme of social change. So before I get into those, I'm going to hand it back up to Kathleen to talk about what social change is at the fund.
Thanks, Tanya. So by now, you've heard us mention that our mission is to support requests with a strong social change or systems change component. So what does that mean? At the fund, we define social change as change that addresses the systemic root causes of social inequalities, such as economic, environmental, political, and racial, in an effort to not only alleviate those inequalities, but also the underlying conditions and circumstances that cause and sustain them. Projects with a strong social change component will be working to change the set of conditions that keep societal issues in place. Typically, we think of this in contrast to charity or direct service projects that provide a direct service without addressing the root causes of the issue. Think food bank versus advocacy for a living wage ordinance so that people can actually afford to purchase their own food. You'll recall that our founders were looking to fund work that was typically overlooked by other foundations and lacked access to funding. The reason we don't fund direct service work is that most other foundations do. That said, we know there is no black and white line about what constitutes direct service versus social change. Sometimes the most basic charity work is actually a social change idea, depending on what else is happening in the community. Context is everything. There's work we support in Santa Maria that we wouldn't support in Santa Barbara. Tanya will now talk to you about the funding guidelines.
Thanks, Kathleen. So on the screen, you have the funding guidelines that all applicants must meet in order to apply for funding from us. They're also available on our website. This is actually a screen grab that I took from the website itself. You'll notice that these tie back to our mission to support progressive social change work that addresses the root causes of social inequities, as Kathleen just said. We were very intentional in the language that we chose to highlight the type of work that we support. And so you'll want to make sure that you are familiar with the guidelines and that your project or request addresses or aligns with at least one. So I'm going to go down the list. So we invite applications from organizations that actively support any discrimination based on race, sex, gender, age, religion, language spoken, or immigration status. And I do want to note that this list is clearly not exhaustive. We invite applications from organizations supporting any anti-discrimination work. Next, organizations actively supporting communities marginalized by power structures to engage in dialogue and actions that seek to counter social injustices. Examples of this are trainings for parents or youth or farm workers on how to realize their own power to affect change on issues that directly affect them. Next, actively work to improve the rights of workers and their families whose living conditions have been marginalized. Then number 4 is promote the cultural life of underserved communities and support the activities of cultural workers. Examples of this include the Guelaguetza in Santa Maria, or Juneteenth in Santa Barbara, or MLK Celebration Committee in Lompoc. I also want to highlight the last part of that to support activities of cultural workers. We strongly encourage folks to honor cultural workers' time by paying them for their work. Next, promote self-determination and leadership development in low-income disenfranchised communities. So we are committed to removing barriers and providing support to folks with lived experiences and centering the people that are most affected. Next, we have promote global peace and organize locally for just policies. This includes educating and creating an awareness of how global and national issues affect our community. Current examples are women's reproductive rights, climate change, gun control. We invite proposals from organizations that work on building coalitions to enhance improving environmental justice and address climate change, especially organizing a constituency, usually without access to decision makers. Next, engage in collaborative action and coalition building to strengthen movement ecosystems. So again, we believe that a key component of real change is movement building, and we strongly support coalition building and cross-sectoral or cross-movement solidarity. We're not being prescriptive about it. We're not saying you have to be collaborating or involved in coalition work, but again, we believe that strong movement building work is supported by coalition work, and movement building work is what we aim to support. We invite applications from organizations that work against community violence and actively support recovery and restorative justice activities and initiatives. And finally, organizations or groups that or projects that operate in a democratic manner, responsive to and directed by the constituency being served. So this to us means that the folks directly impacted by the injustices should be involved in the strategy and program development and have decision-making capacity. And Kathleen will go over our funding priorities.
Thanks, Tanya. So as Tanya mentioned, the grant-making committee uses the funding priorities to drive their proposal review and base their assessment about funding projects. They are in alignment with the values of the fund and help guide the deliberation process. The guidelines are part of the priorities they take into consideration. First, they ask themselves, does this project have the potential to create or advance social, economic, political, and/or environmental change? They're asking, does it align with the fund's values and mission? Next, they'll prioritize projects with elements of community organizing, lobbying, direct action, base building, coalition building, or legal strategy. They want to know, does the project address the root causes of the issue? They'll look at access to funding as well. Does this project lack access to traditional funding? Would the project go forward without support from the fund? Given our social change rooted agenda, the GMC prioritizes groups that lack access to traditional sources of funding or that use strategies that are typically overlooked by mainstream philanthropy, like legal strategies, lobbying, and direct action, policy advocacy type work. The GMC asks themselves, what is the funding trend for this type of work? They take into consideration whether the nature of the project is so new or so controversial that its chances of receiving funding are somewhat limited elsewhere. This is a good litmus test. If you have funding from 5 other foundations for the same project, chances are this won't rise to the top of the priority list for our grant-making committee. A current example of this is DEI initiatives. Prior to 2020, DEI initiatives were not as popular as they are today. However, now there is significant support available, and we would likely refer you to seek funding from other foundations if you came to us with this type of request. The GMC also looks at the critical timing and need, asking, does the organization have the capacity to reach social change goals? Are the key players familiar with other organizations in the same field to further the goal of movement building? They also look at the impact of funds, asking, how clear is the budget outlined? How well does the budget support the project's social change goals? Will funding help start up the organization, stabilize the organization, and/or leverage other funding sources? They also look at regional equity, asking, will this project help the GMC achieve its objective of providing equity and funding throughout Santa Barbara County? The key is to remember that we support projects with a strong social change component, which is what I shared more about earlier. This is what we do fund, and now we'll go over what we do not fund. We do not fund political campaigns that support a candidate or political party. However, we typically fund C3s and C4s lobbying or advocating for ballot measures, with the exception of racial equity funding. We do not fund private interests or direct labor organizing. We do not provide direct support to individuals. Remember, we're focused on change, not charity. We do not fund building improvements, capital ventures such as machines, vehicles, etc., or office equipment. And we also do not fund projects located outside of Santa Barbara County. All projects must take place in Santa Barbara County. And I'll now pass it over to Tanya to go over the eligibility criteria.
Thanks, Kathleen. So I know that was a lot of information you just shared. Again, we invite questions. Please feel free to take yourself off mute if you have any questions, or drop it in the chat. So in addition to meeting our funding guidelines and priorities, projects must also meet our eligibility criteria. Here are the general qualifications that all applicants must meet in order to be eligible for funding from any of our funding programs. First, as we just covered, of course, applicants must meet the funding guidelines and priorities. And then I added, have a social change component is what we're getting at there. Applicants must have a tax ID number if applying with tax exempt status or with a fiscal sponsor, or a EIN number if applying as an unincorporated group. Organizations must have an organizational bank account or a fiscal sponsors if applying as a fiscally sponsored organization. Must not be currently funded by the fund, with a couple exceptions that you see on your screen. And then your budget and planned activities must fall within the funding timeframe of your request. So for this cycle that we're currently looking at, the awards are made in December, so the funding timeline or the budget and planned activities would fall between December 2023 and December 2024. In addition to our general eligibility criteria, we have the multi-year cycle qualifications available for those of you interested in that. One, of course, is meet the general eligibility criteria. Two is that the applicant must have a significant funding history with the fund. And this typically means that you've been awarded a minimum of 3 grants from the fund in recent history. Your budget and planned activities must fall within the 3-year funding timeframe. So this current cycle, it would be December 2023 to December 2026. And then finally, multi-year applications are not available to the general public. If you wish to apply for a multi-year grant application, or for a multi-year grant, you must be screened by staff first, and you can go ahead and email grants@Fund for Santa Barbara to see if you're eligible. I have this slide here about our grant making history that is available on our website. I find that it's a good tool for folks to use to see the type of work that we typically fund. So I invite you to explore that, and Brian is going to go ahead and drop that in the chat. And then diving deeper now into the general and multi-year cycle, Kathleen is going to go over the timeline with you.
Thanks, Tanya. So we want to start off by giving you an overview of our cycle process and timeline. A copy of this timeline is available for download on the grantee portal on our website, and I encourage you to save it so that you can refer to it down the road. We opened our request for proposals on July 28th. The fund offers an optional proposal review, which we'll cover in the next slide. The request for proposals closes on August 28th at 11:59 p.m. We strongly encourage you to submit well before the deadline. Funding announcements will be made in late November, and grants will be awarded in December. If you are awarded a grant, we will ask you to submit 2 grant reports. The first being a progress report due 6 months after funds are dispersed, and a final report which will be submitted at the end of 12 months or when funds are expended, whichever comes first. The fund offers an optional pre-application review for prospective applicants. This is the opportunity to have fund staff review your proposed request and provide feedback that may be useful in completing your proposal. What you'll need to submit includes a 1-page maximum summary of your proposal that details what you're trying to accomplish, a list of key organizers and participants, and a draft of your budget. You can submit this via email by 5 p.m. on August 21st to grants@fundforsantabarbara.org. We highly encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity if you're having trouble determining whether your project meets the fund's guidelines and is a good fit for the fund. Additionally, you can take advantage of our capacity building program and reach out to me for consulting advice as well. As you saw in the timeline, site visits are part of our cycle that happens later in the process. During the first screening meeting, the GMC determines who will be receiving a site visit. If your project is selected for a visit, the GMC members will contact you directly to set it up. Each site visit team will have 2 grant-making committee members and a fund staff member. They'll ask to meet with 3 to 4 members of your organization of your choice. The term site visit can be misleading. You do not need to have a physical site. Site visits can be held either in person at a site of your choice or virtually over Zoom. The GMC will ask you what your preference is when they contact you. The site visit is an informal interview for the GMC to learn more about your project in your own words. Tanya is now going to walk you through the grants portal and talk more about submitting your application.
Thanks, Kathleen. Okay, so we are about to jump into the application itself, but before I do that, I wanted to talk a little bit about our grants portal, which is on the platform Submittable. So we have an entirely electronic grant process. You can find the link to apply on the grantee portal on the fund's website, which I will show you how to do in a moment. From there, you will be redirected to our online grant portal, which is on Submittable, and you will need to create a free Submittable account in order to submit a grant application to the fund. I encourage you to use the email address that is linked to your organization or group that you're submitting the grant application for. The email that you use will be our primary point of contact with you. A quick note that our grant platform is not supported on Internet Explorer, and it works best on Google Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. And there's some benefits to having an entirely electronic process. One is that you can collaborate on the application with your colleagues. And so once the person who will be submitting the application creates the original draft, they will be able to invite other collaborators to join, and I'll show you how to do that once we get in there. The autosave feature allows you to save drafts and come back to them whenever you want. And so I have to say this, it does have an autosave feature. However, for the narrative portion, which is larger blocks of text that we ask for, I encourage folks to work on a separate Word doc because, you know, technology can be a little bit finicky. And so if you are working on the application and want to ensure that your progress is being saved, you can manually also save a draft at any point by scrolling all the way to the bottom and clicking the Save Draft button. And I'll show you where that is once we get in there as well. And then if you find the application to not be accessible to your needs and would like technical assistance, please reach out to us. You can email grants@fundforsantabarbara.org for specific support, and I'm happy to troubleshoot with you and or connect you with a submittable team to provide technical assistance from the platform. Oh, Jesus. There we go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive in. If you were looking to apply for a grant, you would go to our website, which looks like this. You would click on Grantee Portal. And then from Grantee Portal, which you've all visited because you registered for this workshop, you would go down to either current grantees or grant seekers. If you have applied for a grant in the past and have a submittable account, you can log in here. However, if this is your first time, you could go ahead and click here to create a submittable account and be redirected to our platform. From there, you will see that it'll show you our funding guidelines and priorities again, but if you keep scrolling down, you'll be able to see our current funding opportunities. So the 2023 fall grant application, you can go ahead and click apply and then open the application itself. A couple things to note. Important details will be highlighted in red. For example, here is the deadline, which actually the deadline is 11:59 p.m. 12 a.m. is when this application will be closed. So please just keep that in mind. So it's Monday, August 28th at 11:59 p.m. If you try to submit on Tuesday at 12 a.m., the application will no longer allow you to do that. And then there's more information about inviting collaborators, information about saving a draft, and then a link to the Submitter Resource Center so that you can see help videos and articles or to reach out to Submittable directly with any specific needs that you have. The Manage Collaborators button is this one here on the right. You can go ahead, like I said, once the original drafter of the application has created it, they can invite as many collaborators as they want. The only thing to note again is that any collaborators will not be able to submit, only the original drafter of the application will be able to submit the proposal. And then moving down, we have a link to the fund's funding guidelines and priorities in the application for you, so you can go ahead and reference those as you're drafting your proposal. And then likewise, we have a tool that we created, which is the application checklist that you can use to gather any information that you'll need to submit your proposal before you actually get in there and start submitting stuff. Both of them are, like I said, are going to be linked in the application for you. And I encourage you to take advantage of those tools. Red asterisk means that the question is required. And then there's also word limits denoted on the bottom right-hand corner. And then there's specific clues available to get to the heart of what the question is asking. So the first question is asking, or the general information section is covering the basics of the applicant, organization, and the project. And the first question asks you to draft an executive summary of your proposal, which will be used to introduce reviewers to your proposal and your work. You should know that you do not have to answer questions in order. And in fact, I actually encourage folks to come back to draft this summary at the end once you've drafted your narrative portion. And I'll show you where that is in a moment. The only thing I'll say here is to be sure to answer the 4 prompts that are being asked and to write in third person present tense paragraph form, not in numbered form or dot form. Moving on, we ask for the primary contact. This is the submitter contact information. It should be aligned with the person who created the original proposal. Phone number, role, email, and then we'll ask for organization information. So name of organization, this is the legal name of your organization or group if you are in a tax exempt status group, or if you have tax exempt status. And then if you are an unincorporated group, make sure the name matches the name of your bank account. And then if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, we will ask you for the name of that organization further down in the application. So this is specific to your organization or your group. And then your request name, this can be anything to ground the review committee and what the request is. And then we'll ask if your organization has tax exempt status. If you are a 501c3 or 501c4, you'll select yes, and then you'll tell us what tax exempt status you hold, and then you'll give us your tax ID number. However, if you are not a tax exempt organization, you can say no. And then we'll ask you if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor. And if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you can say yes. But if you are not, you can say no. And then we will give you the option to apply as an unincorporated group. For the sake of this application, I'll go ahead and say that I'm applying with a fiscal sponsor, and they have a 501c3. And then I would input the tax ID number for the fiscal sponsor. And then we'll ask for the organization address. This is your group or organization's address. And then we'll ask you if you receive correspondence at that location. If you do not, you can say no, and then we'll ask you for your mailing address. And then we'll also, if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored group, then we'll ask you for your fiscal sponsor's address as well. This is your organization phone, organization website, which you'll notice is not a requirement. So if you do not have a website, don't worry about it. Similarly, this is asking for your social media, but if you do not have that, you can leave that blank as well. All of this is information to get the grant making committee members to get to know your group or your organization a little bit better. The Make Check Payable tool, you'll remember that one of the requirements is that organizations must have an organizational bank account. So here you'll write the name that the organizational bank account is under, and then the financial institution that the bank account is linked to. Next, we'll ask you questions specific to your request. So the first is asking you to very briefly summarize in 25 words or less what the fund specifically will be used for. And then we'll ask you for the amount that you are requesting. For general cycles, the amount should not exceed $10,000. For multi-year applicants, the amount should not exceed $30,000. And then a note to ensure that you know that the funds must be expended within that 12-month funding period, so from December 2023 to December 2024. And then we'll ask you for the type of request that you're submitting, whether that's general operating support or specific to a program or a project. And then we'll ask if the request has received funding in the past. If it has, wonderful, you can say yes and let us know when that was. And if it has not, you can say no and move on. The total request budget is going to be the total budget for your program or project if you're applying with a specific project in mind, or it's going to be your total organizational budget if you are applying for general operating support. And this total request budget will match the organizational annual operating budget as well down here. And then the request budget period start. This is just trying to get an idea of when the work is starting or has started and when the budget period ends. And then finally, we'll ask for when your fiscal year starts. And then we'll ask about specific issue areas relating to the proposal that is being submitted. So this is not for everything that your organization engages in, but it's specific to the request. You can select from this pre-made list, or you can click on other, and then this box will pop up, and then you can tell us what issue areas you are aiming to address. Similarly, the strategies that you plan to employ, you can select from the list, or you can select other, and then tell us what other strategies you plan to use. Request specific constituency. This is the constituency that the proposal aims to serve, not the entire constituency that your organization engages with. If you do not see your constituency here, you can click on other, and then that box will pop up so that you can tell us what the constituency is. And finally, we will ask the geography of where the work will be taking place for this proposal. If you are planning to work countywide, you can click on countywide and move on. However, if you are working in a specific area of the county, you can deselect countywide. For example, South County, and then tell us where in South County the work is going to be taking place. And then finally, we will ask you for site visit information. So if the person that is submitting this proposal is the same person that should be contacted for a site visit, you can click yes and move on. However, if, for example, you are a grant writer, but the person that should be contacted should be the person, the program manager, the project manager, you can select no and then tell us who that person is here. And lastly, we'll ask for the best days and times for the site visit interview. I want to remind folks that our review committee is composed of all volunteer members, and they do have day jobs. So I encourage folks to provide at least 1 or 2 evening options if you have those available. Moving into the request narrative, this is the larger chunks of text that I mentioned earlier, and this is going to be where I am recommending folks work on a separate Word doc. I want you to focus on a couple things. So again, the word limits will be made available to you, and then asking you to use language that non-experts can easily understand and avoid jargon, acronyms, and the use of first person present tense whenever possible. I also want you to focus on the specific questions that are being asked and draft succinct answers. Keep in mind that the grant making committee has to review all of the applications, and you don't want them to have to sift through any fluff words. You want them to really clearly understand your request and your project or proposal. I do encourage you for all of these to break down the questions and specifically answer what is being asked, so that you do not get lost in the weeds. So first, we'll ask you to outline your proposal, describe your request history, purposes and objectives, and your specific request. So here's your opportunity to give us all the background information and lay out the foundation for your proposal. Summarize how the request came to be and what your specific request is, and make sure that you really understand the guidelines and the priorities, and talk about the strategies that you are employing or plan to employ with this request. Next, we'll ask you to talk about how this request is social change rather than traditional charity. Remember, we are looking to support projects with a strong social change component. So here you'll want to connect the dots between social change component of your request and how you are addressing the root causes of social inequalities. And I encourage you to be very explicit here how this request is promoting social change. The grant making committee members will prioritize projects that address systems change. And then we'll ask you to describe how the request is enhancing community capacity to build and mobilize power in addressing the root causes of issues. So tell us how you are working with other organizations and developing effective networks. Again, the grant making committee members will prioritize projects that promote movement building and coalition building, but we're not being prescriptive about it. And if you are not working with other community members or community organizations, you can be transparent. You can say, you know, we're not, and tell us why that is. Maybe there's challenges keeping you from working with them, like, you know, you have different priorities or your missions are not necessarily aligned. And then if you are working with community partners, we'll ask you to describe the relationship, and we'll ask you to tell us who you're working with. So for example, if you're cooperating on this request with a specific community partner, you can click on cooperating, and then you can tell us who you're cooperating with specifically on this project. And then we'll ask you to describe your organizational structure and governance, and tell us how decisions are made and priorities set for your group, and how your constituency is involved in the decision-making process. So here, Talk about how your constituency is in the decision-making process and how they affect the work that you do and influence it. The grant-making committee members are looking to see if this is a top-down project or if you are engaging the constituency and incorporating their voice in the process. And if you are working directly with community to move this project forward, or if you are being prescriptive and telling them what they need. Again, the grant making committee members will prioritize projects with community buy-in and partnerships where the constituency is part of the decision-making group. And I am having internet issues. I don't know if folks are hearing me. Okay. Moving down, we'll ask you to provide 2 references. This is any members of your constituency or key stakeholders who know your request and can speak to it. And then we'll get into your activity timeline. Again, this activity timeline will be covering activities from when the award is granted, which is in December 2023, and run through the 12 months of funding, which is December 2024. A good way to differentiate between these is an objective is what you are going to do or hope to accomplish, and an activity is how you're actually going to do it. The activities and objectives should also support the narrative of the proposal. And then as you're completing your timeline, you should also be thinking about your budget. And I actually encourage you to work on these together and connect the dots between the two. And I'll talk about the budget in a moment. And then we'll ask you what your anticipated outcomes and how you will evaluate the effectiveness or impact of the request within your proposed timeline. So tell us who will benefit and how. For this question, think about what is going to be different by virtue of you carrying out this request. What is the change that you seek to make and how you will evaluate whether the change took place. So you can think about what is going to be different in your organization, what is going to be different in your constituency, or what is going to be different in your community. Applicants get to set their own determinants of success. Evaluation can be very simple. It doesn't have to be elaborate. We just want to understand the outcomes, what the outcomes are and how they look to you. And these can even be general goals. Just be clear, be realistic, and be feasible. And then we'll ask how will the request benefits outcomes strengthen the organization's mission, and how will your organization keep the benefits ongoing and for how long. So here, talk about how this project relates to the overall goals of your organization. Excuse me, and articulate how it relates to your organization's missions and connect the dots for the grant making committee. And well, excuse me, the project does not have to be ongoing, but if it is, tell us how you plan to keep the benefits ongoing. Next section is the financial information section. Here, we'll ask you to identify any major fundraising strategies of your organization for this request specifically, and who is responsible for implementing them. And a strategy is a specific plan of action to raise funds for the request. Activities are the specific ways in which these strategies are carried out. An example of the strategy would be engaging your boards in committing to provide monthly financial contributions, for example. This example also shows that you have buy-in from your board and that they are vested in the work that you are proposing. What resources aside from funding does your organization have access to and need? So here you'll want to tell us to what extent community members are engaging in your work. So for example, what kind of community buy-in does your project have? Does your board participate? Is your constituency supporting you? Who are your advocates and supporters for this project? It doesn't have to be monetary support. It can be in-kind donations, like a constituent lending you their space to host meetings, for example. This is really your opportunity to flex your muscle on how you've been resourceful and creative with the resources that are available to you. But also the other part of that is to tell us what resources you're lacking and need. It doesn't mean that we're gonna be able to address all those specific needs, but Kathleen and I do sit down together, and Kathleen then develops out technical assistance or capacity building resources through the capacity building program. And again, if you have specific needs that we may be able to support with, go ahead and reach out to Kathleen. Brian just dropped her email in the chat again. The financial information and expense table is divided into two sections. The first section is the income section, where you would be adding all of the income specific to this request. Note that the amounts should be plain text, so no special characters, no dollar signs, no commas, no periods. And then the table will automatically tabulate. So here I added $10,000 for the fund, and then you'll keep adding any other sources of financial income for this request. The second section of the table is the expenses section. So here you'll tell us the expense items, and then you'll want to give us very detailed notes so that the grant making committee knows what exactly the funding is being used for. The amount requested from the fund, as you'll recall, should not exceed $10,000, but total expense amount can exceed $10,000 because we know that expenses often are greater than $10,000, and folks are looking for other funding sources to supplement that. So here, this total number should not exceed $10,000, as that is the amount requested from the fund. And then this total expense amount should be adding all of the expense amounts that you have listed. And then a note that your total income up here should match your total expenses amount here. And then this number here should balance out to 0. So for example, if I change this, you'll see that it no longer is balancing out at 0. And I have a surplus according to the budget. To give you a full picture view of what this can look like, I have a sample that I've created with tips and tricks on what you can include in your financial information table. This is for a general support request, the sample. So these are all of the income sources that I have listed. And then you'll remember general support is your total organizational budget. So this is quite a hefty amount. And then you'll see that the amount requested from the fund does not exceed $10,000. This number is balancing out to 0. This number of total expenses is matching this total income number. And these are all of the expenses that I have going on for my organization. That table is available for you to take a look at and download as you are filling out your table here. You can click on this button here. And then some notes to be aware of, the income and expense summaries. This is for the proposed request only. Unless your proposed request is a general operating request, then it's for your entire organizational budget. The amount requested from the fund must not exceed $10,000. I encourage you to provide detailed notes for each expense category. The total income amount in section 1 must match the total income amount in section 2. Do not include special characters in the numerical field. And this is a cash only budget. Do not include in-kind donations. And then we'll ask you, does the total income in section 1 match the total expense amounts in section 2? If it does, and this is balanced out at 0, wonderful, you can say yes and move on. However, if it does not, and you try to move on, it will actually send you back and ask you to fix it. Finally, it'll ask you to confirm that the total amount requested from the fund, which is this number here, does not exceed $10,000. You can go ahead and tick that off and then move on. We'll ask you for your organization's highest budget priority. So of the items included in your budget, we're asking you to prioritize them in the event that full funding is not available. We'll ask you for your top 3 priorities for this request. And then lastly, we'll ask you for any past funding sources for this request. And you can include the dates and the times and the amounts. Second to last section is the additional information section. This section is will differ depending on whether you are a tax exempt group or applying with unincorporated status. But all applicants will have to list list all key participants involved in the request. So this is the key participants that are leading the request. And then we'll ask for a list of the board of directors if you are a tax exempt organization, or the governing body if you are an unincorporated group. So this is like the key leads of the group that you are involved in. We'll ask you if at least half of your organization's leadership reflects the community you aim to serve in any of the following respects. You can click on any of those if any of those are true. And then we'll ask if you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, we'll ask for the list of board of directors for the fiscal sponsor. And then we'll ask you for your organization's IRS determination letter. If you are applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, then you will upload the IRS determination letter for the fiscal sponsor. There's a sample that you can see here to know exactly what we are looking for. And then we'll ask you for the that question is doubled. I fixed that. We'll ask you for the State of California Franchise Tax Board determination letter as well, and then you can see the sample for that here. And then a question is not required, but if you do have an organization logo, you can go ahead and upload it, and you can do that here. And then finally, in this section is the optional attachment. This is any document of your choice that helps the grant making committee understand your organization and or request a little bit better. It can be a brochure, an article, an interview recording, a video, a flyer, etc. This is for the grant making committee members to know your request better. The last part of the application is the disclaimer and agreement. This is to certify that the information in the application is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and is being submitted with the board of directors' full knowledge and endorsement. So the first section will be your signature, the date, and your certification. And then the second part of it will ask you to send this reference request, which is just a board approval, like not even an approval, it's a board acknowledging that that they are aware that you are submitting this proposal on behalf of the organization. So tax exempt organizations, you will send this to your board of directors, typically the president or the treasurer. Those of you applying as a fiscally sponsored organization, you will send this to the board of directors of the fiscal sponsor, again, either the president or the treasurer. And then those of you applying as unincorporated can send this to a lead of the group, ideally someone that deals with the finances. And everything that I just said is outlined for you here. The last thing is to ensure that the person that you selected completes this form before the RFP deadline, so that your application is not considered incomplete. And lastly, now that we've made it down to the bottom, this is where you would come to save a draft if you need to log out of your application at any point. And then if everything is complete, this is also where you come and submit and hit apply. And that is the application. Before I take us back to the rest of the presentation, are there any questions that I can answer? Folks are quiet. Okay, well, let's come back here, give it a second to load. Oh,
Tanya?
Sierra, go ahead.
I was just wondering how elementary education would fit into the eligibility requirements.
Typically not closely. Can you talk a little bit more about what the request is?
Training college students to go into underserved classrooms and teach elementary students environmental education.
Yeah, typically that won't fall in line with our funding guidelines, unless there's some kind of follow-up or some action in terms of a systemic change being created.
So it doesn't align because it's creating agency within the students, but not advocacy.
Kind of, yeah, because theoretically, what we would encourage is some type of systemic change within the school system itself.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sierra. And Sierra, you feel free to email me and then we can chat about it some more so we can get to the nitty gritty of it.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. Any other questions? From any folks?
I have a question.
Yeah, Enrique?
So it's kind of like a two-part thing. So the name of the project that I started a long time ago is called Kick Around the World, and it's bridging cultures together through kicking. I'm currently active sailor, and I started this project in Papua New Guinea, and all it was is to bring people together through a kicking competition. And the beautiful thing about rugby is both boys and girls can play. And so my idea was to share flag rugby, since contact sports have been kind of looked down upon. I've noticed a big rise in flag football and flag rugby. And I wanted to know if something like that meets the requirements for the fund. I can elaborate more, but I'm just trying to implement more non-contact sports, whether it's elementary, middle school, or high school. I've noticed a big growth in the private sector of that, but want to know if the fund would support projects that go, I guess you would say this project would go into a school system. Does the fund support stuff like that, like after school program, or, because I'm kind of new at this.
Yeah, no, great question. I would have to get more context, but right now, from what I'm hearing, it may not be fully aligned.
Okay. Yeah.
But I am happy to chat, and then we can again talk about it some more so I can get a clearer understanding.
That's not a
And then
problem. That's what I wanted to ask.
folks, yeah, no, thanks, Enrique. And likewise, I'm available, but also Kathleen is available, and I encourage both of you, Sierra and Enrique, to reach out to either one of us so we can sit down and talk through it in more detail.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, right now it's more of just brainstorming, but yeah, I appreciate that.
Of course. Kathleen's a good resource for brainstorming as well. She does technical assistance one-on-one with folks all the time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing screen and stop recording, but I will stick around a little bit longer. If there are other questions, I'm happy to answer. In the meantime, I will say thank you. Thank you for being here this morning on this chilly, rainy morning. And I look forward to hearing from you all